Hello and welcome to the Comparesoft Facilities Management Podcast. In this episode, we're looking at building and managing a PPM schedule for mission-critical environments, where over 80% of facilities rely on planned preventive maintenance as their core strategy. Today, I'm joined by Marianne Martin, PPM and Statutory Compliance Manager at First Rail London. Marianne has spent over a decade managing PPM in demanding environments, including Wembley Stadium and GTR rail depots. She's currently responsible for PPM and compliance across more than 80 London Overground stations, sidings and depots. We'll explore the essentials needed for building and managing PPM schedules and what CAFAM capabilities are a must-have for PPM teams. Marianne, hello, how are you?
Hi, Ryan. How are you?
I'm excellent, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today on what is possibly one of the hottest days of the year as well.
It is. Very hot. It's been hot for the last few days. I don't know how we're surviving, but we're here, aren't we? I've got
Well,
lots
we're
of
always complaining about the weather.
Yeah, I know.
So,
I'm trying.
yeah,
I'm trying not to complain too much.
exactly.
I
I'd
will
rather
mind.
complain when it's hot than,
Yeah,
if it's raining or when it's cold. So
exactly.
that's fine. No problem.
Exactly.
So I'm super excited about our chat today, so I'm
Thank
just
you,
going to
Ryan.
straight in. You've spent over a decade in facilities management across some
Yeah.
pretty demanding environments as well.
Mm.
Your current role covers PPM, statutory compliance for London Overground stations, sidings
Yes.
and depots.
Yeah.
I'm really curious, what does your day-to-day actually look like? So when you open that planner on the Monday morning, what are you
Yes.
looking at first?
Well, for me, when I open what I do is I've programmed into the system. It sends me a weekly breakdown. So on a Monday, funnily enough, on a Monday, it's a weekly breakdown and it will show me all of the jobs that are open, all of the jobs in terms of PPMs that are open, which ones have been completed and the ones that are statutory that are open. So that's my first, on a Monday, gaze into what's going on. And then what I will do is I will go into the system and then get a bit of more of a deep dive on what are those jobs that they're showing that are overdue, or the statutory statutory compliance jobs that are done and the ones that are overdue, appearing to be overdue. And then once I do that and sort of go through the jobs and see what they are, then my next sort of stage is to speak to the contractor to find out whether they're aware. They usually are. And what are we going to do to get back on track, essentially? What do they need from us as well? Because sometimes it's an us problem. People forget as well.
Right. So you're using this system to essentially track, what's due, what's overdue, what we're on top of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Essentially tracking, managing everything. And
Yes.
what does that volume of PPM activity look like? I mean, it's across 80 plus London Overground stations, right?
It's across 80 stations. What you have to remember also is these stations, obviously they have like a ticket office. They have obviously the external, internal lights. So it is a lot, because obviously you've got to remember, even 1 or 2 PPMs, that is a lot. It's probably hundreds, if I couldn't even give you a number. But obviously it varies towards what sites they are. For example, there might be a site with a boiler, there might be a site that doesn't have a boiler. Those two are going to have slightly different PPMs being done each month or throughout the year. But I mean, I suppose the thing for me is because when I've worked in transport, it's primarily been in depots. The new experience in this role that it's given me is dealing with the fact that the public are around. And they are as much as they were a customer when they were in the depot, they were kind of far away. But this time they are using the facilities that me and my colleagues are essentially managing and trying to keep on top of. So that sort of incurs not interesting risks to be aware of, obviously, because it's the public and it's the staff. But obviously there's certain things that you can't necessarily do in the day. You might have to come back and do it in the night, or it might have to be done on a weekend. So those things, because it's a fully functioning, most of the day station, there's certain times when you can't necessarily, do an emergency light where it shuts off all the lights in the station. That might be something that requires someone to come back to us and say, look, Marianne, like one of the station teams, this is not possible in the day. Can it be done in the night?
And does that play a big role in what you're sort of prioritising on that weekly review, that Monday morning review?
I suppose it kind of depends. It depends on what the site is. If I can see it's sites that probably have caused an issue in terms of getting PPMs done before, there might be things that might ring in my mind that I need to sort of speak to the station teams and speak to the contractor and sort of say, look, is there an issue here? if there is, can we work together to plan this at another time, or plan it when someone is there to support? But I would say on the Monday, it's all about just checking the percentage of our compliance. So I have separate to the CAFM system, I have a register. And what I do is I just populate all the latest dates for all of the PPMs in there. And I have a RAG status. So when I'm seeing that there's some overdue in the CAFM system, I can have a quick review and see, oh, look, I can see they're coming up red on the RAG system. And then I know it's showing quite accurate. And then I know I need to contact the contractor to sort of, like I said previously, what's going on? Is there an issue? We need to get these done, or like we need to get back on track. So we're aligning with the planner again.
Yeah. I'm very interested to know more about that CAFM system soon.
Yeah.
The RAG system you've got set up, is that more spreadsheet based, or is that a completely different digital tool?
It's more. It's literally just me populating it with a formula, but it just shows me and my colleagues who look at the register, if they need a quick overview, that I've put that date in. That date is in the future. It's a green, so we don't have to worry about that site. And then it shows me when there's ones approaching their expiry date, and when there's some that are overdue, so I can sort of see, even if for some reason, I don't know, they could have done an update and the CAFM system might be slightly out, I can at least have that as a backup to say, well, according to this, and this date is on the sheet, this is the time that this should have been done.
And how big is that register you've got?
Oh, it's so big. Oh, it's uneven. It's, put it this way, when I'm reusing it, as you can imagine with all the lines, it takes a long time to sort of generate the page. But imagine it's got over 80 stations on there and over maybe 20 or more PPMs. So I have a line for each site. So each location's to the right, and then at the top we have the PPMs that they are that are done at that site. So as you can imagine, emergency lighting is done everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, but a gas service is maybe done at less than 10 sites. So it's very varied. But it's a big sheet. It takes a long time to populate and make sure it's accurate as well, because I want to make sure it's accurate. I mean, the planner is great, but if they do any changes to the frequency, or if a PPM is done early or something, that can sometimes change the date. So I can go to them, but on the sheet, it's saying it's this date. So we need to get it done now. Do you know what I mean? Rather than maybe they did it earlier or slightly later, it needs to. My thing is, from my experience, is it's extremely important to show that you follow the planner. And that if you can, do it in advance, because it can show you to what to look out for ahead, and it can also show you what perhaps is missing and what needs to be added.
And that sounds like a bit of a bugbear if a PPM has been, addressed a week before it's actually scheduled. Would you say there's a gap there for maybe some real-time data?
Yeah, I mean, here it's the contractor tries to make sure, where I am now, they try to make sure that it's in date and it's routine. But I've worked many places before where, I mean, we've done it earlier, but then there's always that issue, isn't it, where if you log the completion earlier, it redoes the PPM for that time next year. And that could be great if you've got resource, but there might be a time where you don't have the resource, or the only time the contractor can come and do it, because they programmed it in, is every April, for example. So it can just cause a bit of an issue where things might be slightly out, or the system, you have to sort of rejig it to ensure it does it at the right time, I would say.
Yeah. Just out of my own curiosity, so you mentioned there you got PPMs for things like emergency lighting. I think it was gas boiler service as well.
Yes.
What's the difference in then? How often are you scheduling PPM for emergency lighting? Is it weekly?
Okay, so it varies. So emergency lighting is done every month. And that is just a normal, it's something called, I don't know if you've heard of it, a fish key. So it's literally a flick. It's just to ensure that they're functioning.
Right.
And then every 12 months, you do an annual test. That annual test includes the flick to just check they're all working, but also a drain down of the battery, because remember, they're not connected to the system. So usually it's a 1 hour to 3 hour drain down, where you drain down the system to see, in the event of a fire, is it all going to work functionally on the battery? And then that's when I would say the yearly does a bit more of an intensive check of the system. And then if anything comes up through that remedial work, it's logged and our contractor gets out and plans it in for those remedials to be rectified. With a
Okay.
with a gas check, that is done annually.
Yeah, sure. And is
Mhm.
there like, so with your emergency lighting, I take an example, is there like
Mhm.
a checklist that is accessible on your system, that the contract would download, they tick it off when they're
Um,
done, they'll go and say, this is done?
currently our contractor follows, I don't know if you've heard of it, is FSG 20.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, how I would explain it is kind of like an industry standard in
Yeah.
terms of maintenance, where you can say we follow FSG 20, and FSG 20 shows you all the stages that you're supposed to do when you're completing a job. So when you're doing a gas safety, you're doing an aircon check, it will tell you that, you've got to do it every 6 months and you've got to do this stage, this stage, this stage to
Mm,
complete the task. So yeah, we do have guidance, and the contractor uses that to plan how they do the PPMs.
excellent. We go back to the register we mentioned earlier. Just
Yeah.
how important is it that everything on that register is accurate? Like, would you say it's the most important element of having a successful PPM strategy?
I would say, if for me now, I suppose in my role, I find it very useful, because if someone asks me a quick question, rather
Mm,
than logging into a system, generating a planner, which can take some time, I can just open the register and just look and see. So for me, I want to be able to give people information quickly when they're asking me information. So I would say for me, it's important, because I can at least say, well, this is what the job sheets are saying, the dates are due. So if there's any discrepancies,
mm,
I can say, well, I'm taking this information from the actual job sheets themselves. So that's where this information comes from. I would say for my colleagues, maybe, and my managers, it's probably very important when they're being asked by somebody when something is due, or when the last time something was done. I suppose it's a good reference point, rather than just relying heavily on the CAFM system,
mm.
which is good, but I suppose it's just that quick reference point. If anybody needs to know the dates for anything, everyone wants to know when something is due to expire. As I said, with the RAG status I've put in, you can
Yeah.
see by the site when something is not, or you could look and, contact me and say, hi, Marianne, I've noticed on the register that it says it's due in June, but on the CAFM system, it says it's due in July. It could be a little IT issue, but
Yeah.
we can go back to them and say, well, the last job sheet was in June, so it needs to be done in June, unless there's extenuating circumstances.
Is that a manual process when you go to like figure out, okay, why is there a discrepancy here?
I think sometimes, obviously, because where I work now, the CAFM system is managed by our contractor, so it's a lot of communication with them. But when I've
Hmm.
worked in places before, and when we've managed the CAFM system, sometimes it's just a case of possibly someone's put the PPM in the wrong time,
Yeah.
and that's why it's showing the frequency. Or, as I said before, someone's completed the job early and
Mm,
it's just rejigged the date and stuff. So it could be something quite small, but I mean, I suppose the register is good, or even documentation itself is good, because even if you don't have the register, if you have the documentation and you believe it should be done in June, you can just look at the documentation. So
yeah.
I suppose that's why documentation is so important, because even if the CAFM system is showing that it's not June, you can say, but look, the last sheet is showing June. That's what we want to go towards,
Yeah.
basically. That's what we want to follow, to keep the planner accurate for people, because there's no point in having a planner, Ryan, if people look on the system and it's not accurate, because
Yeah.
then they can't use it for what it's supposed to do, which is to give you peace of mind that things are planned in and that they are either done or going to be done.
And that sort of hard evidence, that audit trail,
Mm.
of, okay, this was actually done in June, so let's update the system. It's done
Yes,
in June.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is there a certain like capability or feature that from your CAFAM system that matters
Hmm.
most to keeping a PPM schedule running?
I think, again, obviously, it depends on who's managing the system. But I think for me, one of the most important things of managing the system is to ensure the assets have been inputted correctly.
Hmm.
I think that's extremely important, because at the start, that will give you any knowledge of whether you need to add PPMs in, whether sites have had PPMs added, but they're not required because someone's done an asset check. So I would say that is one of the most important things, because I used a system called Concept Evolution. And when I worked in higher education, and one of the things I was tasked to do at times is that sometimes the faculties would swap rooms, essentially assets, but imagine they're rooms. And it would be up to me to swap the responsibility and management, or who the owner on the system, and that kind of sort of smoothing of the assets and ensure they're in the right place was really helpful for the managers and the head of FM when reporting on the ownership of stuff. So I would say the back end information, making sure the assets are correct, making sure the responsibilities and their frequencies are correct, are some of the most important things when you're using a PPM planner, because if they are wrong, you're not going to be able to show that you're able to follow a accurate planner, but also sometimes things can be missed because they're not going to be caught until you go, we've been here for a month or a few weeks and we've noticed that there's this asset in this room, but it's not on the asset list and it requires, 3 PPMs a year, and that's an additional a cost for the contractor and the client, because that wasn't costed in, for example. So I think it's very important early on to identify those things, because the cost, I always see cost as money, but time and effort. So I think it's very important.
So even though there's that sort of automated switchover in asset relationships, there's still that room for manually checking if everything's right.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So if like I said, if it wasn't when I used Concept Evolution, I would be able to move them so they were in the right place, or I would be able to say to whoever manages the CAFM system, this PPM is in the wrong frequency. It's showing every 3 months. It should be every 6. Can we swap that round? And yes, you can do it manually. I think that's quite important in a CAFM system, because it's not necessary, I don't want to call it mistakes, but things can be put in incorrectly because that's what it was maybe agreed to be done 3 monthly, and then maybe it turned out that it only needs to be done 6 monthly. So that's a reason for the change. But yeah, you can, from some of the systems I've used, you can go in the back end and make those changes.
Yeah. So when you've had to build or reshape a PPM schedule, I'm really curious, where do you actually start? So what are the first things you need to get right before everything else can fall into place?
I think, like I said, the asset list is really important, Ryan, because you need to know what you're going to be maintaining for the year. So you need to be able to understand, what contractors do you need to source, what of your own engineers can actually complete the work, and also understanding that an asset, like for instance, when I worked at GTR, obviously I worked in the depot. So if there was PPMs that were required in the shed, it's not as easy as doing the gas heaters in a shed as it might be in a ticket office. Because I would have to speak to the production team. I would have to say to them, look, I need this done. And they'd be like, but Marianne, we can't move these trains. They need to go out for service. So it's all of that communication to ensure you understand the asset, but you understand where the asset is, because you're going to react in a very different way if a gas boiler, like I said, is in a ticket office to if it's in a shed, because there's certain things that you're going to have to understand and put into place before the work is even completed. So I would say the asset and the understanding of the asset and the environment that it's in when you start a PPM is very important. I think that knowing that and knowing the frequency of what it was done before, because sometimes PPMs are done every 6 months, but maybe this, if you're in a 24/7 building, you cannot run the maintenance like a building that shuts down at 5. Because essentially it's running a lot more, because essentially it's never stopping. So you might say, well, we usually do this every 6 months, but let's do it every 3 months to see if that helps with the maintenance and helps with the cost, the lowering of the costs for the reactives. Because if you're getting recurring reactives, sometimes that could be the issue, is that it's not being maintained enough for the amount of time it's being used.
Have you had successful cases of that? So if you're taking like a 6-month PPM down to a 3 and it's completely, reduced that reactive maintenance bill.
I've had examples where perhaps when I worked at GTR, we had a bid, and it was, I don't remember what the contractor was, but we had a PPM where it was done every 3 months, sorry, 3 times a year. And because of how the asset was running, it seemed like it would be better if we included 2 more visits in the
To take them up
year.
to 5 times a
To
year.
take it up to 5
Yeah.
times. Maybe it was actually 6 times a year. I'm not sure, but we increased it because we wanted to see if that would help, because there was recurring calls and feedback from staff on site that this was causing them an issue. So there's stuff like that. So it's essentially you're doing above what is required, which no one's going to complain about that, are they?
Yeah.
But again, it's just a cost. But I see the cost, as I said, of not just money, but time and effort. Sorry. And people, the feedback you get from the customer, the client using the environment, if that's going to help them, then I think it's a cost worth making sometimes, if you can.
Yeah. I suppose there's a flip side to it as well. Like an asset can be over preventative. There
Yeah.
could be too much preventive maintenance on it as well.
hmm Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of the time, I haven't experienced that a lot, but I agree could be a time where perhaps you're doing too much. But I suppose, like I said in my example, if you're doing too much, but it's stopping the
Mm.
complaints, it's helping the site run better, then most people don't really see that as a big issue, that you're doing it more. And I think most people will try and do at least the minimum that is required. So there is usually a valid reason why people are increasing it.
Yeah. Would you say one of your main KPIs, your money on main team KPIs, is keeping reactive maintenance down?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Which is why I feel it's so important to understand your environment that you're going to be maintaining and the assets that you're maintaining.
Mm.
Because when I worked at London Underground, if there was times where there was an asset that was repeatedly having reactives, I would send them an email to the facilities team and just say, look, we've noticed this asset is recurringly failing. I've had an engineer check it and they believe it's approaching end of life. And I would ask them, would you like a quote for a replacement? So it's showing that we're doing our job
Mm.
and that they're doing their job because their contractor is doing what they want them to do, which essentially understand the asset. So I would look on the CAFM system data and see the amount of recurring jobs that are coming up, and then see that if that's going to keep happening, the best option is to offer them either new parts or a
Mm.
complete new install of a brand new asset to stop that recurring reactive call, and just to start keeping it back to maintenance
Yeah.
PPMs.
And you mentioned there like replacing assets. So
Yeah.
obviously aging assets, aging equipment, it accounts for nearly
Mhm.
half of all unplanned downtime. So
Yeah.
how do you manage the balance between maintaining aging assets and making the
Mhm.
case that they need to be replaced?
I think that is really difficult when it comes to life cycle analysis and then
Mm.
assessing the risk of not replacing it or doing any upgrade to it. I think that for me, I've always been trying to my managers, who are usually the head of the department, who assess the funding, or I would use my budget, but I would have to very much explain the reason why. So it wouldn't be necessarily I would do a complete business case for it, but
Mm.
I would definitely email and sit down with my manager and explain, and show the recurring reactive issues that we're having, the complaints from the staff in that environment, and try and explain that ultimately the reactives are costing you more than it would to the parts. Sometimes if it's like parts that are obsolete and you're going to recurringly have a reactive, sometimes, like I've said earlier, it's easier to not necessarily, I suppose easier is not the right word, but it makes more sense to consider an upgrade of the system,
Mm.
because you're improving your assets for the future, and you're also trying to stop or reduce the reactive call outs and the client, I wouldn't say happiness, but the client involved, they're never always happy, are they, clients? But I try my best with them. But just understanding that this is not something that they want to happen, and showing that we're trying to improve it by upgrading the system to further improve their environment, and for us as a department, improve our assets.
Yeah, that long-term vision, that long-term
Yes,
planning
yeah,
is so
thinking
key.
very long term. Yeah,
Yeah.
because essentially, if you, yes, of course, I understand it's a cost, but if you do that upgrade and you do it in the advised specialist way, it's going to reduce the amount of reactive, it's going to reduce the amount of complaints, it's going to make the environment a better place for the staff within it. And all of that, as well as the PPMs, has always been very important to me, because it's really important for me to understand, yes, I know that's an AC unit, or yes, I know that's a boiler, but explain to me what you do in this environment and what you do in this area, because I like to be able to understand that, because I feel it's better for me to react to things. Or, if there's a PPM coming up, because I know what they do in that area, I might know that I need to plan more. I might know that I need to speak to this manager before I get any dates forward. So it's very important for me to understand what happens in that environment, and in the event of assets failing, what is the ramifications for them, so that I can understand that better when I'm trying to deal with PPMs or any downtime in assets for them.
Just hearing that, I think that internal knowledge and that constant communication,
Yes.
that's also
Yeah,
key as
I
well.
think it's very important. Like, it's very important when I was an FM to develop those types of relationships with people. I don't come from a necessarily technical background, but if you speak to engineers that I know who I've worked with, I've always been very interested in it. I would go out with them and see how they would do things. But as much as I don't necessarily know everything, I still like to understand, like I said, what do you do here? How does this work? And blah, 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 to just get that knowledge, so I know I can react better in the
Yeah.
event of downtime or when planning PPMs.
And I think you described yourself as the central knowledge hub for PPM information.
Yes, yes. So I will speak to there's a compliance manager on the other side. We work very closely. If there's any issues with the PPMs or anything I have noticed that appears to be overdue, or if I'm not sure when something is going to be planned in, it's that person who I go to. So we speak quite closely, and obviously we have reviews, and anything that I have noticed will be brought up there.
Yeah. Obviously, one of the complexities in your current role is that different stations have different maintenance
Yeah.
responsibilities. So some
Mhm.
tasks sit with your team, some sit with Network
Mhm.
Rail, some sit with
Yeah,
TfL.
yeah.
How does that
Yeah.
split affect the way a PPM schedule is sort of built and managed?
I think, well, from my experience, obviously because I worked for GTO as well, and we had a very similar thing, the PPMs that are done by our contractor tend to be the ones that are in the planner. And then if you want to, you can add the Network Rail ones in.
Mm.
Me and my colleagues, when I was at GTR, the other infrastructure managers, we had a very good relationship, I think, with the Network Rail. So we would have meetings with them, and they would let us know if there was any PPMs going to be completed by their contractor. I would say that where I am now, there's not a lot of PPMs that are completed by Network Rail. A lot of it is done by ourselves. But I would say in general, as someone who's worked in many places where there's a blur in responsibility, I think, again, it's just understanding, building that relationship with the
Yeah.
landlords, and just understanding what they are, what do they do? Do they do vegetation? Do they do drainage? And just understanding for your site in particular. Like when I had a site, it was pretty much some of my other sites when I worked at GTR, they were very much, we managed it, pretty much everything. And then I had one site that was a bit complex, because some of the stuff you had to go through Network Rail first. So I couldn't just send someone there for everything. So
Almost like a bit of a bottleneck for me.
yes,
Yeah.
slightly. I mean, they were really helpful, the people who we worked with, and at times, obviously, that it was a lot of communication. But that, well, I would say, was I wouldn't say it wasn't. I mean, at times, yes, it was difficult because if you needed something done very quickly, there was lots of people to communicate with. But I tried my best to ensure that I developed a very good relationship with them and tried my best to understand that dynamic because it was very different to where I was before. So I had this one singular place that was very, I wouldn't say particular, but in terms of where I was working before all my other sites, it took more communication to get to resolving things, I would say.
Yeah. Marianne, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I just want to
Mm.
leave the listeners with one last bit of advice from yourself.
Yeah.
If a facilities or PPM manager listening to this is trying to build or improve their PPM schedule,
Mhm.
what would be the one thing you'll tell them to get right first? Would it be that asset relationship, that
It
data
is.
integrity?
It
Would it be
is.
getting a system in place?
I would say obviously a CAFM, I've worked with many. A good CAFM system is really important for me. I like one that can show me the assets, the
Hmm.
asset age, and I like one that gives you that flexibility, as we said before, to be able to go in and make any changes so you can have the accurate data. But I would say the most important thing is the asset register
Hmm.
because that gives you the understanding of what you need to maintain, and it gives you the understanding of what PPMs that you need to put in place, and it kind of gives you that confidence when you start that it can give everybody the contractor and your colleagues and the FM team that understanding of what we are required to maintain and how often, and also how we are required to plan in work at different sites. As I've said, obviously the station teams, like, they're not going to want us to do necessarily an emergency light or something that requires may shut the water off, for example.
Mm.
So, when someone's asking me, oh, can we come and do some work at a station? And if it's water, I say to them, can you please confirm to me that this is not going to cause any disruption to the site? How long is the water going to be shut off for? Because although we do need to do that work, of course, it's vitally important. I need to take into consideration the people that are working there
Yeah.
and the public, and that is going to cause an issue. So it's more communication about that. And I think that comes as well as things like your risk assessments, water risk assessments, fire risk assessments, but your asset register just gives you a whole load of information. It tells you essentially what is out there and what we are going to be required to maintain, and the assets that are, approaching end of life that have recently been installed. So you can sort of also, the heads of department, like my manager, can project the asset cost for the future.
Mm.
If you don't have that, it's really difficult because you can't accurately see to the future and you can't accurately know exactly what's out there. And that can cause frustration for FM teams and the contractor because they want to do their best in maintaining the sites, the stations. But if they have limited information, that can be really difficult.
And
And I'm
obviously in it,
saying that as a client and someone who's worked on FM
yeah,
contracts. So I've done both sides, and it's a frustration both sides.
yeah, you see that angle from both views.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Obviously, like a
exactly.
24/7 hour operation, there's no shutdown windows as well, so
No,
it's
no,
so
no, no.
important.
I mean, no, I mean, I've had issues at buildings at 11:30 at night, Ryan. I've had floods on a Sunday at like 6 o'clock in the evening. Yeah, it just
Sitting down for dinner.
literally sitting down for dinner. So I suppose I'm used to, obviously, because it's a depot environment where I've worked before. It's different to stations because no matter what stations do close, the depot, everyone's there all the time. So you
Mm.
don't really stop because people want to be able to cook. They want their toilets to work. They want their lights to
Mm.
work. They want to be able to do their shift. So it's not, you can't just think, oh, it's 6 o'clock. It doesn't really matter. No, because someone will, I mean, I've had
Yeah.
emails at 2 in the morning. Do you know what I mean? Too. And it's not like, why are they emailing me? Well, they're working, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I would
Did
say.
make sure your phone's on silent.
No, I mean, no, I mean, they don't. They always say, Marianne, when I was at GTR, they were like, sorry to disturb you, Marianne. And they'd usually assume I would pick it up in the morning, which I did,
Yeah,
but I didn't really mind because it's a 24/7 building. I can't expect them not to want to
exactly.
do
Yeah.
that. So, and we were lucky enough that we had an on-call help desk. and an engineer would go out. So that's a thing that's extremely helpful as well.
Excellent. Marianne, you've been a brilliant guest. You've given us
Thank
such a
you, Ryan.
practical view of what it takes to build and manage a PPM schedule, particularly across a large, complex portfolios, and that's going to be useful for any facilities manager trying to get their planned maintenance right.
Yes.
So thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Ryan.
And thank you all for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. See ya.
Bye-bye.